Now that the latest season of The Mandalorian...
If you had spoken such insolence to Jabba, he'd have fed you to his menagerie.
Book of Boba Fett, whatever this show is called, now that the first season is complete, is it good? Is it worth your time to check out? What did you think? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and this is my spoiler talk review for Season 1 of the Book of Boba Fett. Overall, as I'm watching this show, I feel like I kept bouncing between a B and a B minus. The B is the obvious reasons for all the cool stuff that they do at the end of this season. The B minus is because it took The Mandalorian, Baby Yoda, and Luke to take this season and really make it something good. So honestly, I don't know. I've had time to think about this. I've had to let this digest. I feel like I want to give it a B minus. I still feel like the show is above average because I really like what it's doing. I like what it's building towards, like with Ahsoka being in here, we're really building towards her mission of finding Thrawn, of finding Ezra. Like all of these things, like we're building towards it. We're laying that really good groundwork and I'm really excited. And overall, I mean, I didn't hate this show. There were just things about it that weren't as great as Mandalorian Season 1 and Season 2 have been. I mean, for instance, when you really get into this show and you're diving into the first 4 episodes before it was redeemed by the other show, like one of the reasons it needed redemption is it was weird how it was building up, okay? So in episode 1, the flashback to show us how he gets out of the Sarlacc pit, taking Patton Oswalt from the Parks and Rec show and turning him into a prophet. Hand down from the twin sons of Tatooine, we are now close on the mouth of the Sarlacc pit. After a beat, the gloved Mandalorian armor gauntlet of Boba Fett grabs onto the sand outside the Sarlacc pit, and the feared bounty hunter pulls himself from the maw of the sand beast. It's really cool showing us that and filling in those gaps. I love the part about the flashbacks where you really see him living with the Sand People. Now, I just did this podcast over on Hot Takes for Nerds. Definitely check it out. We talked about a lot of really cool things in that podcast, including the show. And one of the things that dawned on me while I'm having this conversation with other guys is if you're really looking for a character arc in Boba Fett, it doesn't happen in the show proper, it happens in the flashbacks. And that's kind of the problem with the flashbacks. You go back to Arrow seasons 1 and 2, whenever it flashes back to the island and you're getting the backstory, it's building the lore. At the same time as it's filling the backstory, you'll note that what he learned, the hard lesson he learned in the flashback, is not something he could directly apply in the episode we're going through right now. And that's not really something that they did in this show. And so the only time you really got flashbacks is when you have Boba Fett in the tank. So every time you get to the tank, you're like, oh, here we go, another long flashback. And it kind of felt like the main show where he's on Tatooine and he's taken over Jabba the Hutt's throne and all that stuff. It kind of feels like this is the flashback. This is the side story. The real thing is going on here in the flashbacks. And what he learns in the flashbacks does not directly correlate to something he needs to do here and now. When you kind of go back and you look at it, the real purpose of seeing his time with the Tuskens is to show this change in heart that Boba Fett has had. This is the character arc. This is where he learns he doesn't just want to be some solo bounty hunter working for any piece of slime that would hire him. This is where he really sees family. This is where he experiences being in a tribe. This is where he earns their respect and he learns to give respect back in return. He goes from being a slave of the Sand People to being one of them and welcomed in. And so I think all of the flashbacks are really good and a really interesting story. They do help fill in the gaps between him being in the Sarlacc pit and Mandalorian. So it does accomplish its purpose, but it almost accomplishes that purpose at the expense of the show we're supposed to be watching, which is supposed to take place after Mandalorian Season 2, where we're seeing him sit on the throne of Jabba, his former employer. And I don't feel like you get that much of a character arc or character growth as you go through that process. And so, like, Finnick is the toughest one. And that's interesting to me because when you get into Mandalorian Season 2 and he freaking kicks butt, And you start to see him train with the Sand People. So on top of the fact he was the most feared bounty hunter, now he's learning to fight like the Sand People fight. So you're seeing where he learned that particular fight style. The first time you watch him fight in the first episode, I talked about this in episode 1, I won't spend time here, but when he's fighting the people with the red shields, and then immediately he needs to be saved and taken to the tank to be healed and all that stuff, it's like, that doesn't feel like the Boba Fett that I just saw in Mandalorian Season 2. Yeah, they have moments of great fights and great moments where he really kicks butt, but there's just those moments where I'm like, is this the same dude that I just saw in Season 2 who really takes names and kicks butts? Like, I was kind of wondering that a few times. So for me, and I don't want to camp out here a lot, but that's what it was like for me watching the first few episodes, because then, as soon as we have the Mandalorian on here, boom!
You are fighting against the blade. You should be fighting against your opponent.
This is where it gets beyond fascinating. I mean, it takes the lore established in Clone Wars, reminds us of it, and builds upon it. I mean, come on, the moment you see Mando and he's got the Darksaber and he like cuts his leg, I'm like, dude, are you just that bad fighting with a lightsaber or the Darksaber? Or like, what's going on? And then to add to that lore, that the Darksaber has a destiny. So he's kind of working against the destiny of the blade, which is what gives the blade this weight. So he's got to learn to work with it and not against it. And even though having it kind of gives him this difficult destiny, he's got to learn to accept that by faith. You can see where I'm starting to go with a theological analysis with this, can't you? So that part was incredibly interesting, and I liked that. And that was one of my favorite parts of bringing back Mando. The other part that was awesome is getting to see Baby Yoda. I just wasn't expecting to see Baby Yoda in the Book of Boba Fett, let alone Luke Skywalker. But I loved it. The whole training thing where you really saw, it's like the mirror image of what you had in The Empire Strikes Back, when Yoda was riding on Luke's back and was training Luke to be a Jedi. Now you have Grogu on Luke's back, but it's Luke that's training Grogu. And it was just really cool because of the practical effects. So it kind of adds this layer of cuteness to it, like when you're watching him jump from rock to rock or try to balance or whatever. But it's really cool because it really just has such a Empire Strikes Back reminiscence. But the other thing is, and my wife and I both got mad at this, when Luke presented Grogu with a choice. Either pick Master Yoda's lightsaber and stay with me and become a Jedi, or take the chainmail that Mando came to give you and choose him. I don't like that, because I saw this on a meme, and the meme took us all the way back to Star Wars Episode 3, where you have Obi-Wan saying to Anakin, only a Sith deals in absolutes, and I went, oh! But what I think could be interesting here, like, I don't know if the goal of these shows is to overwrite the sequels or to fill in the gap to make the sequels better. Like, I don't entirely know the goal, but I feel like it's filling in the gap. Like, it's building the stories to try to legitimize some of the stuff that happens. And if that's the case, could this be a bit of Luke's first disillusionment? That his first student, Grogu, chose the Mandalorian over him, over the school, and learning to be a Jedi.
Sometimes I wonder if his heart is in it.
Like, he had that love and he had those attachments. And that, to me, was always the thing. When you look at the Jedi on the light side, they became so unbelievably religious. It's like, have you forgotten what you're fighting for? You're fighting for people to be able to live, to love, and to have those attachments. And I understand, like, you don't want to have attachments that distract your mind and distract you from the purpose and the call, but also to have love, to have those things that ground you, could focus you better. And I feel like that's kind of what Luke is trying to say in The Last Jedi. And so maybe this is the beginning of him seeing what maybe needs to change in the Jedi Order. Like, even if he's not going to make those changes now, maybe this is where the seeds start to be planted. I don't know, but these are thoughts that I had. But it was just awesome to have Luke there, the green lightsaber, him doing the lightsaber exercises in front of Grogu. Like, all of that was awesome. And so these things that add to lore, and bringing Ahsoka into it, like, it got me excited for her show, and Thrawn and Ezra and what's going to happen with that. By bringing these other characters in, this is what got interesting about Boba Fett. Not Boba Fett, but this. What they're building to, it just got me excited about what's coming. And then having Cad Bane come back and be here in live action. Hey, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Is he dead? Like, do you really think he's dead and gone? Or do you think they're going to find a way in this sci-fi Star Wars universe to bring Cad Bane back. But I loved it, from that epic entrance coming in from the desert to his eyes and face being covered until he looks up. He was a fascinating character in Clone Wars, and whenever he was on, I was like, oh, it's gonna go down. So as soon as he showed up in this, I went, oh my gosh, he's still alive? Ha ha! It's gonna go down. You can tell I haven't really finished the Bad Batch. I need to. Anyway, the point is, it was really cool bringing Cad Bane into this and having him and Boba Fett go up against each other in the end. I'm not sure if Cad Bane is dead or alive, but the other thing is, and we talked about this in the podcast, and I thought this was a really interesting point, it's the fact that you don't get attached to the Syndicate. There isn't a villain in the Syndicate like Vader is a villain. There isn't somebody that you really get attached to and go, this is why the Syndicate is such a threat. It's kind of like this background threat. So if they would have just brought Cad Bane in like episode 2 and he's the representation of the Syndicate, that really could have gone a long way in helping us get into what is going on with the Syndicate. Even in the final fight where like the citizens or the people turned against, you know, Boba Fett and his team, it was just like, oh, I guess just the more people shooting at him. Like, it's just, there was no emotional attachment to it. There was nothing that made that scene spectacular and overwhelming. It's just like, okay, more people shooting. The other Star Wars stuff was more interesting to me than the Boba Fett stuff, which was the reverse when I was watching season 2, where everything was interesting to me, including Boba Fett. So that to me is kind of the real difference with this show. I like what it's building towards. I'm looking forward to where it's going. And who doesn't love the fact that Boba Fett came in riding on the Rancor? Oh my gosh. That was just spectacular. But also Baby Yoda coming in, and he's got his little chainmail on, and R2 flies him in, and then he uses the Force and he brings the beast to sleep. Then he pets its nose and cuddles up right next to him and goes to sleep. And then Boba Fett, the final shot can't even be Boba Fett, right? The final shot is you have Mando in his new Naboo starfighter with Baby Yoda and that perfect little thing made for him, like knocking on the window because he wants him to go fast again. Like, that's the final shot. But it's also showing us what's coming. And so, honestly, I'm excited for Mando Season 3 and what they've set up with the Darksaber, and he needs to go to Mandalore to repent of the fact that he's taken off his helmet and broken his oath and all of that stuff. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the personal conflict of the fact that he would be willing to take his helmet off for Grogu in a heartbeat, but here he is trying to go walk through the living waters to repent. And so, like, things like that are incredibly interesting, and I'm very much so looking forward to the setup. One of the things I love to do in these things is find God in these stories, and one of the ways that I find it in this story is kind of how Boba Fett was reborn in the flashback. And then you have the Sand People taking him in and teaching him a new way of life. And it so changed him that when he comes into Tatooine, that's what he wants to do. He wants to build a tribe. And to me, that's just this representation of how God redeems us, but he doesn't just redeem us where we are born again and made into something new, but he imparts such a new life into us and teaches us such a new way of life, and it can be so transformative. It is so transformative that we want to go into the world and be that salt and light and bring, like, show the world the transformation that we have encountered and transform the world around us. And so I thought that was very cool, and very cool to see Grogu choose his father. You know, like, we don't have to live under the father of lies. We could choose our father, and we can choose God as our father and choose that relationship and that relationship of love the way Grogu chose his father as Mando and chose that relationship of love. So there were elements in this that I just thought were kind of cool on that level and some of that symbolism that I found. And I'd be curious, what else did you see in the show? What did you think of this first season of the Book of Boba Fett? Let's talk about that in the comments. While you're there, hit the subscribe button to become a Durbanian. Hit the bell by the subscribe button so you're notified for my next movie review, ranking video, theological analysis, or anything else I do here. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.